and welcome. I am Piers Ridyard, CEO of RDX Works, a core developer of the decentralized finance protocol Radix, a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi into the mainstream. This is our podcast, the DeFi Download, a show about decentralized finance and all things crypto, where we dive into the details of the projects, assets, and services that are powering the DeFi revolution. Today, I'm joined by Yossi, founder of Metaversal. Metaversal is an NFT curation company which earlier this month closed a $50 million funding round. They're a holdco company that invests in NFTs and creates new NFTs via their venture studio. Yossi, thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, Piers, pleasure to be here.
So, well, first of all, massive congratulations! $50 million Series A. That's pretty. That's pretty chunky. That's great work. So, like, how did that come about? How long ago did you guys get started? And sort of what was the little incubus of the idea? And then how did that end up ballooning to the sort of a very attractive $50 million funding round?
Yeah, we've been working on this now for about a year. And closed the round December last year. And the incubus of the idea comes primarily from being in the crypto space now for 5 or 6 years, full-time investing in it, and before that being involved in the open source software movement. And when NFTs came onto the scene in probably like late 2017, early 2018, started collecting NFTs and also interviewed a guy by the name of Jake Bruckman. He's the founder of a crypto VC fund known as CoinFund. And at the time, CoinFund was pretty much leaning into all things NFTs long before anyone else was doing that. So they were early investors in Dapper, Rarible, and a whole bunch of other protocols with the thesis that NFTs were going to go mainstream. And that was late 2017, early 2018. And through that conversation with Jake, I got very excited about NFTs and saw that what was happening is that this technology, the potential that it offered was to really unlock this ownership layer on top of all of these decentralized networks. We call it the ownership layer of the metaverse. Think of property rights. That's what NFTs represented. So that seed was planted early 2018, been investing since then. And when we saw the explosion of the NFT market, probably with CryptoPunks as the first kind of mover, where a lot of people started jumping in and starting to see that, oh, wait, this is something that is really interesting. I called up Jake and said, maybe it's time that we launched a metaverse-focused fund. He said, coincidentally, CoinFund was looking at doing the same thing. And the two of us got together. We started talking about what would that look like and why a fund is actually the wrong approach for this industry and for this asset class. Right. And the structure that we came up with, which is this holdco company, which you just mentioned, was the right approach. And a year later, we've now closed that Series A, and we have both an investment arm and a production studio arm that works on investing in those iconic NFTs and the picks and shovel businesses that will unlock the metaverse, as well as working with major brands, creators, producers to help translate their IP and figure out how to bring that into the metaverse, into an NFT strategy, and we become co-producers together with them. So that's the genesis and where we are today.
Okay, so let's dive into the value of an NFT a little bit.
Sure.
So why you talk about like the NFTs being the property rights of the digital space? It's an interesting way of looking at it. I mean, there's several things that mean that right now they are not actually that, right? The intellectual property rights are associated with the imagery often don't pass and have not really, they've sort of been ignored in many ways in how these things have been created. And, our view on NFTs is that they are a lot broader than just artwork, which I think starts to come into this idea of property rights. But like, what do you think you own right now, as in like as an investor in the NFT space? What do you feel like you own right now when you buy an NFT? And what do you think about that needs to change or mature for these to actually become sort of like fully like mature, serious asset classes?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it goes to the fundamental understanding of what is it that you're buying, what are you investing in. And not every NFT is created equally, even though it may be using the same technical standard. You may not, like you say, be acquiring the same rights that you think you may be. So it's something like a Ape Yacht Club, if we use that as an example. allows the holder of the NFT to have the full commercial rights to the asset that they hold. So to that ape that they hold, they own the commercial rights to that. They don't own the rights to the Bored Ape Yacht Club brand. They're unable to use the brand name with whatever they want, but they can take the likeness of their ape, their image, they can create a story with it, they can create a book, they can take it and try and produce a movie out of it, literally anything that you could think of with that asset. Compare that to something like a CryptoPunk created by Lava Labs, which is an original, which has got this kind of status as the OG collectible in the NFT space. Lava Labs retain all the rights to that image and to the likeness of that image and any commercial rights from it. So effectively what you're getting there is ownership of a collectible that you're able to display and that you're able to hold. Those are two kind of diametric opposite or opposing spaces with the same thing, with acquiring an NFT. And then the third example is something called a noun. Nouns DAO is another type of collectible. And Nouns, what they do is they release their project under what's called a Creative Commons license, where, in fact, no one owns the right to the Nouns PFPs and likeness. Anyone can create a derivative work. There is no control over who has the commercial rights over it, and anyone can now modify and adapt the likeness or the image itself and go and create some kind of derivative work, which we've seen in the open source world as a licensing mechanism that's been for some time. Those are three different examples in three collectible communities of completely different licenses. So to answer your question, the thing that someone needs to be thinking through is, well, what is the rights that I'm acquiring with this? Because just because you're holding an NFT doesn't mean that you're actually getting the commercial rights or the ability to create derivative works or the ability to do anything but hold it and display it.
It's interesting because that's looking more at NFTs like you would look at sort of music artists in signing a deal, right, for a performing artist, which feels more encompassing, but at the same time that feels like it's changing the very nature of what people consider NFTs to be in the first place. A lot of people are at the moment go, well, an NFT is just a piece of art and I own it by owning I actually just what feels like to me I own is a one-time record of a thing on a ledger that has value because people desire ownership of that one-time record of that thing. Like the image itself is almost its marketing, the marketability of that marker, right? Because the image isn't on ledger. But there's a strong social convention to be able to go back to the history of that thing and go, well, those two things were linked at one point, where the creator said, well, actually, the ownership of this image, they say the ownership of this image is linked to this marker, but what they actually mean is that I created this marker, and this marker, as far as I'm concerned, denotes ownership of this image, but it doesn't have any of those intellectual property rights. But then what happens is there's a secondary market of people going, well, it doesn't de facto have any of those intellectual property rights. Correct. And then there's this market of people going, well, I want those markers. I want that marker that exists on that ledger, because I could take a Bored Ape and I could stick it on Avalanche and create a unique NFT of that Bored Ape on Avalanche. And it's only the market that says, and the community that says, well, that's not the same thing. It's something different. Like it's not. Yeah. So we don't feel like we've built anything more robust than just going, well, whoever created that image gets to be the one who says where the marker lives. And then the marker becomes the thing that everyone wants to own.
Well, I think if you think about it, it's similar to a certificate of authenticity that you'll get on this being a signed photograph of your favorite baseball player, or you've collected a series of basketball cards and you're getting them graded by the PSA to say this is a grade 9 or a grade 10 card, but it's an original.
I disagree.
From Topps.
I disagree because in physical space you have hexaity, you have a thisness. The object itself is not separatable from the fact that it is the original, right? In the art world you have the same thing, and I own this piece of art that was created by the creator, and I can't separate your baseball card example, right? Is I actually have the card, and
but the card may be fake. The card may not be the original.
For sure.
You don't know that the card is actually the card. And we see in the art world, in the traditional art world, unfortunately, a lot of the art that you think you're buying is not actually the art that you're buying.
Right.
And then it goes to the whole question, well, what's the value of the art? Was it that you thought that this is a Picasso and you spent $10 million on it, and when it's revealed that it's actually not a Picasso and the likeness is exactly the same, should it be worth $10 million? Or does it go back to that original point that you made? It's being able to prove the provenance. It's being able to prove the certificate of authenticity that this is the actual painting that Picasso created and therefore is valuable. And the same with Bored Apes. This is the actual ape that Yuga Labs created and therefore is valuable, even though you may decouple the images. And there are technologies and there are new approaches to NFTs where majority is being done on-chain, but there are, of course, limitations with size and what you can do as this whole blockchain infrastructure starts to expand and be able to support more data being brought on-chain.
So you've given 3 examples, which is sort of like Bored Apes, CryptoPunks, and Noun Project. What do you view as the right approach? What do you think, what excites you most out of those 3 approaches, or do you think there's another path?
Yeah, we think of it on a spectrum, and what probably excites us most is towards the Nouns Creative Commons license, more open. As people coming from the crypto industry, more decentralized, more open, more accessible is always more favorable. And we think about this as a completely different asset class that challenges traditional IP models. Is that what derives a lot of value in these NFT communities? We'll call it the NFT value stack. One core component of that value stack is the narrative that spreads around this NFT. Like you say, what does the market say? Is this thing valuable? Mm-hmm. And what drives the narrative is what enables it to have some kind of network effects. What can allow this to become more mainstream? And we've seen how things like memes take hold in social media and become an overnight sensation. If you're now thinking about an NFT asset, how do you drive that organically? Well, you do things like Bored Ape or Nouns, where you give commercial licensing or you give full licensing or no licensing to the community that they can then go do whatever they want. They can go create memes about it. They can put it on T-shirts. They can host a concert with apes or take the Nouns and go and create completely derivative projects. That creates those types of narrative flywheels that enables those types of network effects, as opposed to the traditional IP model, which we know very well, where that control is held centrally and you go and you license every single piece of IP and someone infringes on it and you go and you send them a cease and desist. It's a completely different approach here because the value is in that asset. It's in that NFT. So you want to do everything in your power, like we just had a conversation about, that it doesn't matter if there's all these derivative works. It doesn't matter if there's T-shirts that weren't created by Yuga Labs, as an example. What matters is that it's driving the value and the icon kind of status in culture of these assets as the ones that people want to acquire, hold, trade, and integrate into their ecosystem, so that you can do things like take a Bored Ape or a Noun, put that into a liquidity pool, and know that there will be people who will actually put up some ETH against it, so you have a trading pair and that you can actually borrow against that. And the only way you're going to do that is because it becomes this mainstream sensation.
Interesting. Okay, so like, how do you deal with? You have one person who is the owner of the certificate of authenticity, and like this is a far better certificate of authenticity than has ever existed before, because it is undeniable in almost every sense of the word. So, as an owner of an NFT. One of the things that often happens, I'm just going to throw some hypotheses out here because I think these are really it's a really interesting space, right? And it's sort of working itself out. So when brands get very big, often what they tend to do with their brands is they go from being aggressive promoters of their brands to being aggressive defenders of their brands, right? Where it's like it's no longer about getting the word out there. Any press is good press. It becomes about protecting the value of that brand and the thing that gives it its uniqueness and positioning in market. So, you can think of the Apple brand as bit like Apple incredibly aggressively protect their brand, because anything that dilutes their ability to sell the product in the first place. And you can talk about Nike in the same way, or any of these brands that we think of as great, that we think of as like, as consumers, they hold a place in many consumers' hearts that have that desirability to them, right? Yeah. And then let's look at the way in which memes progress. And the one that I'm going to talk about here is going to be Pepe the Frog, right? So Pepe the Frog started off as a cartoon that was sort of like, it was actually quite a joyful cartoon. It had a little bit of sarcasm to it, but it certainly wasn't dank and like the place of dank memes. And it certainly wasn't associated with right-wing idealism, right? Yeah. Now, you could argue that in some ways, I can see why you might want to say, why someone at the start of a project might want to say, well, if we open it up, it's most likely to get famous. But at a certain point, there is this idea of actually being able to curate the image of a brand, where anything that detracts from that can actually take away from it, can damage the brand, can make it less valuable. So, like, when you think about things in terms of open source Creative Commons versus, commercial licensing of the Bored Ape Club, how do you, to me, at least to me, it feels like just immediately on instinct that Bored Apes would be more valuable long term than a completely open source brand that actually isn't able to have a curated vision of what the brand is supposed to represent and what it's not, and what it's allowed to be associated with and what it's not. Yeah. And I want to go on to talk about this because you guys are also open sourcing your brand. So this is something you clearly have thought about in depth. So yeah, thoughts.
Yeah, it's great. And we obviously don't know the answer because it's playing out in real time. But I think if you think about things like, let's think about Bitcoin as a brand. Who is that curator? Who is the authority that says we're going in this direction or not in that direction? And the community, for all it's worth, is that custodian. And we may not like aspects about the Bitcoin brand, or we may love other aspects of the Bitcoin brand. And it may get hijacked by certain stakeholders at a point in time, and that could be the risk that presents itself with Bitcoin. But it's built in that type of grassroots community where anyone theoretically is an owner of this brand and can represent it. I'm wearing a Bitcoin t-shirt. No royalty was paid to any organization for the use of being able to put this logo on this t-shirt. And I'm now a co-owner or a promoter of Bitcoin in this kind of open source brand and open source lexicon. Ethereum, on the other hand, similar in nature, also open. Anyone can become part of the Ethereum community, but there is a feeling of a more controlled curation of who Ethereum are, what is their culture, who are the people that kind of are aligned with this type of brand, although it's not kind of, this is the license that you have to use if you're ever going to use them, and the Ethereum Foundation is not coming after you if you're using that type of logo. So those are both two communities that are on that end of the spectrum of a more open approach to their brand. And even within that more open, there is some degree of influence and control within those communities. So that's kind of how I would frame something like a Nouns project in this kind of open Creative Commons license. And using your example of Pepe, yes, we've seen that the imagery of Pepe has now got distinct subcultures. And depending on who you are, you see Pepe the Frog, you may think, wow, that's someone representing extreme right-wing ideals. Or within the crypto community, it's still very much seen as these are the original crypto art projects. And the first time that kind of the concept of crypto art was brought to the world on Colorcoin and other blockchains. And it's a collector's item. So that subculture is there.
When rare Pepes were created. And yeah, absolutely. Like this is...
And now the community is trying to bring it back and say, this is actually what it stands for, and let's go and build that out. So it's completely interesting because on the Bored Ape side, they're retaining some control, but also opening it up. They're not saying completely. They're not the Nikes of this world. And that's kind of the next step on that spectrum. We're of the view that We want to be more like the Bitcoins and Ethereums of the world. We want a more open and decentralized metaverse that's owned and created by everyone, as opposed to a corporation that is saying we are the custodians of this and we make all of those decisions. So we're taking that viewpoint and that philosophy and that ideology and saying, well, let's mirror that in the creation of our brand with all the risks that that comes with. That this kind of Pepe example is a great one, that it may get co-opted and we don't like the direction that it goes in. But the corollary of that, or the opposite of that, is, well, then we've got to be this closed organization that is going back to a command and control type of style, which is everything that we're building against. And that's why, and that's how the thinking goes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think, as you say, there's a spectrum. I don't think it's black and white. I don't think there's two routes here. And I also do think there's a difference between a platform that is for the building of, if a building on top of, or building under the umbrella of, versus a piece of art that has its own sort of like recognition and intellectual property value of itself, right? So like Metaversal as a platform, or Bitcoin as a platform, or Ethereum as a platform, I do think that I'm much more of the opinion. I agree. Like open as possible is the best route. The thing I'm sort of like exploring, I suppose, as we talk, is this idea of the imagery of an individual thing. And I think it's going to get more and more complicated, right? Because let's say that you are Keanu Reeves and you create a complete digital twin of yourself, and then you decide to open source the Keanu Reeves brand, and then someone makes a bunch of games that is really popular because people are like, oh, I can play Keanu Reeves, and then the owner of the NFT that represents, the Keanu Reeves digital self, right? If it's completely open source, sees no sides of that. And so you can say there's two arguments here. One, you can say, well, because it's been pushed into public visibility and more people are playing with it and more people are seeing it, then that's going to come back and be valuable to you, the owner, because your thing is essentially perpetuating. It's become its own meme in society as a character that people want to play and feel like they have an affinity towards. So yeah, it's a
fascinating debate. And even in that example, it goes to, well, what's Keanu Reeves' strategy? Is Keanu Reeves' strategy to get booked into more movies? And if he were to create a open source character that can go into any of these game worlds, will that get him into the next big studio production because everyone wants to be Keanu Reeves, and that's the long game that he's potentially playing? Potentially, maybe that's the way it works out. Or does Keanu Reeves have some OG NFTs that he's created that he himself wants to see become those iconic NFTs that if everyone holds on to them and they know those are the grails, then it may make sense that there is all these derivative Keanu Reeves running around in the metaverse. Or, like you say, we'll say, well, I've got a brand. I've spent the past 30 years of my life building that brand, and I want to control who has the likeness of that and who has the right to it, and perfectly entitled to that. And that's another strategy. And that's what's fascinating about this industry and NFTs, is now opening up all these new models to be able to think about IP, to be able to think about asset ownership, to be able to think about how do we introduce this into our culture with new potential economic models, and what are the impacts of that, and what are the pros and cons of doing that. And that's what we do as a firm. We work with IP holders to say, well, this is how we think about it, this is how we would approach it, and this is where we think the long game is, and how we would introduce that to the market. And they may love what we're thinking, and then we become co-producers of that. We actually help fund that and bring that to market. But it's opening up a whole new innovation and white space that I think is encouraging, and ultimately better for the consumers of these brands and of these NFT assets.
So when you're talking to a someone who has some substantial existing IP, let's take Disney as an example, right? How do you run a session? How do you get people to think about how to think about their IP in a metaversal kind of way, and how to think about launching themselves into the metaverse and correctly positioning it, correctly building a community, all of that kind of stuff? What's that process you go through?
Yeah, first we start with the IP itself. So what is the IP in question? So if it's Disney, is it one of their movies? Is it one of their characters? Is it something new and novel that hasn't been introduced before? And what can we do to immerse the collectors or the buyers of that NFT into that story? How do we bring them into that community and into that story? And then what is the value that we can bring into that NFT? What are the things that Disney owns that would be part of holding on to this NFT? So it's not just I'm holding on to a picture of Mickey Mouse and now I have that in my wallet. It gives me some kind of access. It gives me some kind of unique experience that only people who hold this Mickey Mouse NFT will be able to access. And Disney obviously has tremendous IP that they could bring to the table and tremendous partnerships that they could bring to the table through this NFT asset. Now, that's not necessarily unique in what Disney could have done before, but it's unique in how easily that can be executed on and how that community can be built in new ways and technology that didn't exist before. Before, Disney would have had to go and build that entire stack themselves. They would have had to bring in all of those relationships and those partnerships. They would have to go on and created that mobile wallet experience. They would have done every single layer of that stack would have had to have been done by Disney. What can be done now is that you can leverage all of this infrastructure that exists and a global community. And what Disney needs to think about and Metaversal needs to think about is the access and the experience and the immersive experience that needs to be brought in. And the technology layer is kind of taken care of, and those partnerships that can be brought in. So that's how we first start with the Disney to ideate on what does it mean to now rethink how you can have a relationship with your collector, with your customer, with your avatar, and that kind of one-on-one relationship with your NFT holder, with that wallet. And then what are all these different additional utilities that you can then bring to that audience that over time you build that most powerful community, that this community really is raving fans of what you're doing for them. Like we've seen with, and we're speaking about them quite a lot, but like we've seen with Ape Yacht Club, they've done that tremendously well in building that powerful community that in and of itself now is the asset. It's not necessarily only the apes and the NFTs. It's that community that they've managed to create around them that is the asset, why we're seeing brands like Adidas partnering with them, why we're seeing them currently doing a roadshow and trying to raise capital and rumored to be at about $5 billion valuation for a 9-month-old brand or a 10-month-old brand. That community is extremely powerful.
So why hasn't Disney done it?
Well, Disney...
Because the technology is not a problem for them, right?
Sure. Well, you've got to think about Disney. Well, what is Disney in the original conversation that we had? Disney is an IP producer and a very strong guard of that IP and a traditional IP licensor. So they are going to go for the model that they know, and the model that they know, which is working extremely well, which is create these series, and they'll license out that IP in the traditional way. And Disney has done some partnerships with a couple of NFT platforms where they've licensed the likeness of a Mickey Mouse, and you can create a collectible card and you can buy it. But where I think they've got it wrong is they haven't figured out, well, what beyond that? How do I create this immersive experience? How do I do things that I'm unable to do right now? Yes, I could collect a picture of a Mickey Mouse as an NFT, but what is that actually doing for me? And I think they've missed that step because the way it's been approached is a traditional merchandising and licensing agreement, which they know backwards, and no one can school them or teach them anything in that world. But I don't think they're understanding the true potential of what this world can do.
So the difference basically being is that pre NFTs, you were selling a product, and post NFTs, you're building a community. And if you don't understand that fundamentally, you're not going to create a valuable NFT.
I think that's a brilliant way of framing it, 100%.
Okay. So you are also looking at building a DAO, right? You're launching a DAO. So could you tell me a little bit more about the Metaversal DAO and what it's trying to do and sort of how that interrelates with your venture studio and all that kind of stuff? So
the DAO is called MetaLetters. And
MetaLetters.
MetaLetters. It's taking the letters of Metaversal, the 10 letters that make up our name. And like we mentioned earlier, it's open sourcing that and releasing it under a Creative Commons license that any artist or any creator can create a Metaversal letter. Every day we are auctioning that letter for 1,000 for a total of 1,818 letters. It takes roughly 5 years to get to that number. And every letter is done by a different creator. That could be a game designer, it could be an artist, it could be a musician, and they're interpreting the letter M into that design, auctioning it. The winner of that auction joins the DAO, and the proceeds from that auction get split between a percentage that goes into the DAO, percentage that goes to the creator of that letter. And what's quite unique about this is that also the creator who made the letter also joins the DAO and then has a vote over the governance and how that treasury is going to be spent. So we're linking up, we're bringing in new emerging artists. The thesis behind it is to bring in new emerging artists into the metaverse by open sourcing our brand and then giving them a seat at the table that they're able to then decide on how that treasury gets spent. And the mission of that is to empower and support new emerging creators into this NFT. So to try and bring in new talent, new people, and support initiatives that both increase the diversity of the creators that are building in the space and the knowledge of who they are amongst the collectors that we're attracting into this DAO. So we took the model of nouns. For people who aren't familiar with nouns, every day it's an auction of a noun, which is a character, released under Creative Commons license, and then the people who buy the noun get entered into the DAO. How kind of iterations are that? Is that both the creator and the collector now enter the DAO, and it's based around this brand called Metaversal.
Interesting. Okay. And so one of the things that happens in crypto a lot is, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of naivety of like related to money in that if we have a big prize, lots of like interesting things will happen. The more money we throw at something, the more like good something's going to be. Whereas often your initial problem is just distribution of the fact that the thing is happening in the first place, right? So like if I have a competition to win $1 million, but only 5 people know about it, the competition's going to be relatively crappy because the distribution of the knowledge. People. Great for the 5 people. Yeah. 1 in 5 chance of winning $1 million. That sounds great. So how do you guys think about the creative community outreach side of things, and how do you build your sort of like economy of creators?
Yeah, great question. So our first initiative that we've done is actually an open call for creators to be able to design letters, and we did that over a 3-week period. We launched it on Twitter. The people who contributed a design of a letter receive a POAP. Anyone who contributed a letter will get a POAP as being the first people to contribute
just for those who don't know what a POAP is. What is a POAP?
It's a proof of attendance protocol, and basically it's a way of saying that you did something. You either were at an event or you did a piece of work, and you get an NFT in reward for doing that. So we designed a NFT for that. We had about 150 contributors. We're doing a tally on the count from where around the world, but I think it's about 40 or 50 different countries. What particularly excites me about them, majority of the contributors are people with under 1,000 or 2,000 followers on Twitter. It's not the kind of big name brand NFT artists that you may be aware of, and that's core to the mission. We have finalized 10 of those artists. Those 10 are getting their letter printed on a T-shirt that will be distributed at ETH Denver. So you'll have your letter on a shirt, and then the top 3 win a NFT that we have curated ourselves, and the winner of that competition, which is going to be voted on Twitter, gets to create the first meta letter of the MetaLetter DAO. So of those 1,818 letters, the first one will be created by the winner of this competition. So that's just one way we've tried to bring in the community, and I think the key point of the structure itself is that anyone who creates a letter actually joins the DAO. We've seen that the only way that artists really get to participate in their kind of decisions is that they have to bring money to the table. They have to become a collector themselves, and we're saying that that's not right. The people that are creating the work should be equally as responsible as have an equal share in making the types of decisions that will impact future creative artists. I think the combination of those kind of two messages will resonate. But like you say, it's a grassroots. Every day we have to find a new artist who's going to come on, bring up a letter, find a community of buyers, and build a movement around that. And it's done organically on a day-to-day basis so that it has the time to actually do that, as opposed to coming to the market and saying, here's a 10,000 drop, and we sell it all out at once and we may disappear tomorrow. That was the
so how do you find the artists? What's that process?
The process is very much looking on Twitter. Well, one, putting out this type of open call, and we've received 150 artists coming back, looking on Twitter for people that are creating new NFTs and new works that we're really excited about, speaking to the artists themselves, who do you respect, who do you value, and then as these people join the DAO and join the Discord group, starting to recommend others, we allow for people to tag We Are Metaversal on Twitter, and we see every day new people tagging. And then we bring in that community from there, because we are deliberately trying to discover undiscovered artists, so people who aren't necessarily mainstream. So it takes work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why record companies have massive scout departments, and football companies the same, and all this kind of stuff. Like finding great talent, nurturing it is really difficult, and it's a big old hard work, grindy task. It's not certainly not a build it and they will come thing.
And why do we think a DAO makes sense for that is because we're also saying, well, we're able to see this, we're able to put this together, we're able to put in the initial effort and energy, and we'll continue to do so. But eventually the community should be that curator. The community should be deciding who's the next MetaLetter creator, who's the next artist that we should be bringing in. And hopefully, if all is successful, it'll become something that new emerging artists want to see as a stamp on their timeline that they became a creator of this and was showcased as an up-and-coming new emerging artist who's also then supporting and contributing back to up-and-coming new creators and new emerging artists.
Really interesting. Really interesting. So how are you guys deploying the funds that you have raised?
Yeah. So we have two parts of the business. The one is that investment side where we invest in the NFTs themselves and the picks and shovel businesses. About 70% of the capital that we have raised is earmarked for those types of investments. To date, we've acquired over about 1,000 NFTs, and we've made about 7 infrastructure investments, primarily at the kind of C to Series A stage. And we're continuing to do so.
What's an example of an infrastructure investment?
Yeah, an example would be a company called Holoplex that we invested in. They are the no-code, think of a Shopify and WordPress combined experience sitting on top of Solana. So if you're a creator and you're trying to create a NFT marketplace, instead of having to code it yourself, you're able to use Holoplex to be able to do that and rapidly come to market. So that's an example of an infrastructure investment that we've made. Outside of the infrastructure, we've acquired a number of NFTs. We're building up our analyst team to continue on that execution side. Across most chains, we've been heavy into Tezos and one of the first there. We've done a number of acquisitions on Ethereum and a couple of new chains that we're emerging now. And then the remaining 30% is on those studio productions, on those venture studio productions where we're partnering with IP holders to co-produce and bring that IP to market. And scaling up the team to be able to support those two initiatives.
That's really interesting. And like from the point of view of the NFTs investments you're making, what do you see as the main monetization path on the current batch of NFTs that are possible to buy?
Yeah, monetization is twofold. One, we're seeing more and more the ability to kind of the financialization of NFTs. So the ability to then stake that NFT and earn some kind of rewards for that staking, whether that be a new currency or something like ETH, and to be able to borrow against that or lend out your NFTs. So that's one model that we're exploring, and how does that look? The other side is these types of IP deals. So what can you do with the NFTs that you own? Well, maybe there's a studio production with Hollywood that wants to go and produce a new movie and bring that to life. Or there is a game that needs to be developed and a collaboration that can happen. Or there is a famous artist or musician where we can do some kind of collaboration and bring that to life. So those are the types of projects that we are exploring, that we have well into the works, and that we'll be bringing to market within the next few months. And I'll be able to give more information once we are allowed to speak more publicly about them.
Very exciting, very exciting. So there's some interesting announcements coming up later this year, which I'm sure, your community and the rest of the crypto space is going to be interested to see when those come out. So if someone wants to sort of get involved with Metaversal, what are the key people that you're looking for now, and where should they go to get involved?
Key people, we're ramping up our analyst team. So if you are an NFT degen and you want to make that your full-time profession.
Is that a term now? NFT degen.
That is a term. We are excited about speaking to you. So NFT degens, do reach out to us. hello@metaversal.gg. Creative producers, project managers, technical leads, anyone who is strong on Solidity development or Rust or in smart contract languaging. We have about 30 open roles that we're hiring for. So pretty much if you're excited about the NFT economy and the metaverse, we've probably got a role for you. So reach out to us.
That's really awesome. Well, Yossi, thank you so much for coming in. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Wishing you guys the best of luck for the rest of the year. Sounds like there's going to be some really interesting things happening.
My pleasure, Pearson. Thank you for the great debate and great questions.